Karl and myself, we worked together with the Huddersfield Giants. I first met Karl in 2012, end of 2012, 2013 season, wasn't it, Karl? And Karl came in as the sports psychologist or the performance coach, the mind coach for the Giants, and the stuff he implemented was quite unbelievable, really. And I found as I listened to Karl that there was a lot of stuff that I could take, and I did take, and put in to my own practice to improve my results, especially the subjective assessment. Karl's had a massive influence in myself. So Karl, thanks for agreeing to come on the show. And obviously last week you gave the viewers a nice overview of the cockpit analogy as well, which was really good, and I'm really looking forward to having you on the show on a weekly basis.
Yeah, it was a magical time there at the Giants. I think looking back now for a team, Huddersfield Giants, who not the biggest club in the world, to win the sort of league leaders trophy for the first time in 8 years was a perfect example of a club changing a story, wasn't it? And I'm sure we're going to talk about the story, about how powerful the old story was there, and collectively we managed to literally change the story and create some history.
Exactly, and that's the exact same thing that we're trying to do with our patients, and especially the more persistent pain patients that come into us that have, especially the clinic here, and a lot of the cases that I would see, these people have been around the houses, and they've almost, they really do well and truly believe the old story, just like the Huddersfield Giants players, and staff and employees almost started to believe in the fans.
It's a really, really important point, Dave, and I certainly found in my career working with people, when I fully understood the power of the story, and it was from the research of a chap called Timothy Wilson, Harvard professor, and when you begin to understand that whether it's a team or a business or a unique individual, when you understand that we're all just a bunch of stories, and the thing is with a story is if you repeat it often enough, it becomes real. It becomes your narrative, and unless you change that story, you're not going to get different outcomes. One of the really interesting things that I've discovered with this is that within the brain, within everybody's brain, there's something called the thinker and the prover, in the sense that what the thinker thinks, the prover seeks to prove. So if I think I'm an unlucky person, the prover in my brain is always constantly looking out for evidence to support that belief, to support that story, and it's amazing when you get to understand the power of story, and then how to begin to change that story. As we found with the Giants, and I'm sure as you're finding with some of your clients, your patients, when the story changes, you can get some amazing results. But unless you deal with the story, you're only on the surface, aren't you?
Exactly, and that's it. And story is very, very powerful because we remember stories as well. And again, you'll be able to tell me probably why, but the power of story, from kids, we all remember the stories we were told as kids. They're ingrained in the brain, and story is very, very powerful. Why do you think that is?
I think for me, one of the most important thing about a story in terms of the change process is when you introduce the idea to people. The beauty of it is we all know that a story can change. So it's a great metaphor for people that they realise through their life. You mentioned when we were at school, it can be a passing comment from a PE teacher that says, "Oh, Dave, you're not a sporty type, you are you?" And that one sentence can build a story in somebody's mind. Thinker and prover go to work, and every time you drop the ball in rugby or whatever, the prover says, "Oh, that's you, Dave. You're not sporty, or musical, or whatever it is." But I think the big key is that there seems so much power in the word story. Yeah. Because when you say that to people, they go, "Yeah, I have been carrying a story around me." But the really great thing is we all know, we've all been brought up with the idea that a story can change.
Exactly. And this kind of goes in, and we're going to go into this in a lot more detail over the coming weeks, but most stories have a hero, and this kind of fits into what you were talking last week about understanding the individual and not the side of the pain, and that hero in the story ultimately is going to be the patient.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the side of pain. It's going to be how that person overcomes this injury. The transformation is important in the story to ultimately have that happy ending.
If you look at most myths, Dave, another word for story, that's exactly it. That the myths that we remember, the stories we remember, is that the hero has a problem, and he goes about overcoming that problem and comes through the other side. And those are the things that we remember. So what it really reinforces is, for the physio, is that you haven't got a knee in front of you, you haven't got a back in front of you, you haven't got an elbow in front of you. You've got a human being with a very, very unique story, and you need to find out what that story is, and also then help them create a potential new story.
Exactly.
Because if the story is powerful enough, be that a person, the story could be something like being able to walk in the park every day or whatever it is. But if that future story, that future potential story is so strong, they will adhere to your program. There's a big enough why to create the how.
Exactly. That's so important. And just a few points that you've said there is understanding the story isn't necessarily just going through a run-of-the-mill questions. What medication are you taking? Previous injuries, blah, blah, blah. Behind every injury, there's a story. And it's very, very important for us to understand the story behind the injury, because every injury is slightly different, and there's an emotional reaction with an injury. So a run-of-the-mill ankle sprain that you're just going through with your subjective assessment, any previous injuries, I sprained my ankle in 2008. Any other injuries? Knee, and to you as a therapist, you may assume that the knee was a big problem, but actually that run-of-the-mill ankle sprain might have stopped that person missing a final or missing something that they wanted to do but they couldn't do. So there was a massive emotional attachment component to that injury, and even scars and stuff like that, Karl. With some of the more persistent cases that I remember, I had a lady with knee pain, and she physically could not look at her scar or touch her scar. So the story behind the injury, how she felt about that body part, what is that telling the subconscious mind?
Yeah, exactly. Evan, you've just mentioned the subconscious mind there, and the really interesting thing about the subconscious mind is its primary role is to protect you.
Exactly.
It's to keep you safe. And you go back to some of these injuries. Well, what's the best way of keeping somebody safe? The story could be, well, avoid the pitch, avoid the court, avoid whatever it is that created that situation. But unless, as you say, unless you actually uncover what that story is about, you've just written down ankle injury and move on. No, you can't do that. There needs to be a clearer picture of the whole story around that to see how that person in their past history, how have they responded to challenges? Because one of the other things that we'll talk about is resilience. People are far more resilient than they think. But sometimes you've actually got to dig a little bit, find out the story of when they've been resilient.
Absolutely.
And that's a resource that you can use in the future again. Because one of the things that people do is often they actually forget when they have been resilient. So part of the story process is uncovering past episodes of heroism.
Yeah.
Everybody's been a hero at different times in different ways, but often they've forgotten that.
And I'm going to hold you there, and you're skipping ahead to my last question. But you said something really good here, and that's really good. I'm going to come back to that, because this stuff is brilliant. But you said something about the job of the subconscious mind is sometimes to protect and avoid. Mm-hmm. And that's something we see a lot, Karl, in the clinic. And that's something you're going to see in the objective assessment, is when we get someone doing some movements, very often is they're going to avoid loading or putting stress through certain tissues that there's a story behind.
Yeah.
So again, the subconscious mind, my interpretation, is perceiving a threat to these tissues still, and the person avoids loading them. So again, what we're seeing in the objective assessment is ultimately how that person has reacted to their story. So if we don't understand the story in the subjective assessment, then it's going to be very, very hard to get clarity in your objective assessment to then have the confidence to design a good treatment plan, to then ultimately get the adherence to that treatment plan to get that ideal outcome. And just before we go back to resilience, Karl, what are the key fundamentals to changing a story? So this will kind of lead you into that anyways.
The key fundamentals to changing a story, I would say, is attention. Is that on a daily basis, is what are we putting our attention on? And I have a fundamental principle that either your attention is on something useful or useless.
Yeah.
And very often, if the story is panning out in a negative way, a person's attention will very much be in the useless column. The other thing that is also very, very powerful in terms of changing a story, and again, this is where your information gathering with your clients is very important. What is really powerful is that person's environment. What are the triggers in their environment? What are other people saying to them in their environment? Yeah. That's why, we saw it. What you created at the Giants was so powerful because there was a collective belief that the physio treatment that the Giants were getting was superior to anything in rugby league. And I saw it kick in. Players were getting back on the pitch faster. They were playing well after injury because there was a belief around the story of the environment that they were in. So again, going back to that individual client that you're working with, look at what seems to be irrelevant because it's not irrelevant.
Good.
What is that? How supportive is the husband or wife or the family or work colleagues or whatever it is? Because these can provide key leverage points to either keep the story or change the story.
Exactly. And we're going to talk a lot about attention in up and coming brain booster segments with yourself, Karl, because that was one of the biggest things you taught me about attention. But the other thing, just to come back to, is you made a very good point there about other people, and I think it's very important that we bring our patients' attention to people who might be adding fuel to the old story. So just bringing your attention, and what I will say to a lot of people with more persistent cases is I will tell their partner to stop asking them how their back is, how their knee is, because what people then, they become their knee. And that's absolutely massive in sport, where the head coach almost does it, where the person's an ACL injury or whatever, they're out for 6 months, they come in, and players, because they're not in the normal environment, they're in a different environment, players feel awkward, and then the first thing they say is, how's the knee? So this player or person has been asked, how's the knee? 10 times a day.
Is that a person can end up wearing the injury like a medal around the neck.
Exactly. Because we see this every day clinically.
One of the things that is very powerful for human beings. Human beings, we all like attention. We all like to feel understood. And suddenly, if the knee becomes a conversation point, or the back, or whatever, as you say, it just constantly reinforces the story. And I'll say to clients that I work with, what's more important to you? Is it maintaining this current story with the attention that you get with it, or actually do you want a future that you're really going to enjoy? Exactly. And so when people really, really get how powerful the binding of the story is, they start to understand all these different factors. But you, as the therapist, have provided them with an understanding that they didn't have. They didn't realise how important the questions other people ask them about the back or the knee or whatever are to just bind the story. So, they can actually then take charge of their own script.
Yeah.
My fundamental belief with all this is that I want people writing their own story. I don't want the story given to them by others, by society or whatever.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, we've all got to take responsibility for our own story. But if we don't understand the power of it, we won't do that.
Exactly. And that leads us nicely into us as therapists, like last week's episode, trying to have certain exercises and trying to fit the person into our exercises versus what we need to be doing is fitting a rehab plan around that person's needs. Yeah, and I think that's exactly what you're saying there is making that person responsible for writing the story, and we've got a big influence in that initial assessment and actually helping that person to write that story. So what that looks like practically for me is I do not go past the subjective assessment until I understand what the ideal outcome for the patient is. So I'll always say to my mentorship therapists, how can I design a rehab program if I don't know where the person wants to get to? So again, a lot of these people, I'll say to them, where do you want to get to? I just don't want to be in pain. So again, that GPS, or the reticular activator in the subconscious, is set to anywhere but pain. Yeah, but they don't know where they want to get to, so there's no destination. So I think that's very, very important.
You mentioned it's a great analogy for people to think about. If we've all got sat navs in the car, if you get in your car and you just punch in Manchester, you're going to end up in Manchester, but you're not going to end up where you want in Manchester. But don't blame the sat nav if you get lost.
Yeah,
it's your responsibility to program the sat nav, just as it's the individual's responsibility to program the destination that they want to go to, not where they don't want to go to.
Exactly.
Another analogy I have is you wouldn't go in a supermarket with a list of things you didn't want, would you?
No,
You'd be just wandering around all day. But the minute you go in there with a list of 5 things that you do want, those 5 things direct your behaviour.
Nice. Exactly. And that probably was the highlight of this show just there. Your attention and your intent dictate your behavior, and the same, we can take that from movement behavior as well. Okay, so that's very, very important. I want you just to digest what Karl has just said there. And in the coming brain booster segments, we're going to start to give you some applicable strategies that you can start to use to direct attention and to also figure out what that end goal is and to help write the story. So that's really good.
What I would say with everybody listening in there or watching in there is get excited about being able to change stories, because for you, you've experienced it, the pleasure that you get in helping people change the story is far bigger than just, it's great if the knee gets better, but if they understand the bigger picture of story, you've provided a tremendous value to them.
Exactly. And my goal with every patient is to make a meaningful impact on their life. That's my goal. It isn't to get rid of knee pain, it's to give them back value to their life. That's why I'm in this business, that's why I've got a clinic, that's why I've done an online mentorship to help more therapists give more meaningful impacts. And I think once my attention is set to that, then that helps me with my behavior in order to guide that patient. And I just want to go back to the story, the hero and the destination. The hero is the patient, we are the guide. And the hero usually meets a guide who helps him get to the destination. So we're not the hero in the story where we're fixing a back or fixing a knee. We're simply guiding that person along the journey to reach that destination. And I think that's very, very important to understand as a therapist, is we're not the hero in the story, we're the guide. The hero is the patient. And if we put the patient at the forefront of it, then we've got a great chance, because then that story is specific to them and more meaningful to them. So that's really good. And just the last point today, Karl, because the people are going to see, again, we could spend 2 days on a course talking about just this segment here. But why this is the last little bit today. Actually, there's 2 bits. There's one question I'm going to put you on the spot for that you said to me with a previous teaching thing. But why do people keep repeating the old story?
I think it goes back to a hardwired mechanism inside us, a little bit related back to the unconscious mind. It is that the unconscious mind sort of says, well, primarily it is aimed at survival. So your unconscious mind wants you to survive. And the way it thinks is that what I did yesterday, if I do what I did yesterday, today, I'll still survive. So the behaviour might be very negative, but I've survived. So if I do the same again for another day, I'll keep surviving. So the unconscious mind thinks very sort of short term about replicating behaviour. So it's kind of like that's why we can look at the whole change process in many areas. It's challenging for people because of that unconscious desire to just keep replicating the same thing. But when you actually bring the story out into the open and get people to recognise that, then they can see the difference, and then they can see why they can change.
Yeah, and the more I've been thinking about this a lot lately myself in all aspects of life, and the first step is awareness.
Completely.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're saying there, isn't it?
What I talk with people a lot about is that 99% of your life you're on autopilot. Your unconscious mind is just operating systems, and that's a good thing. If you had to think every day about how to make a cup of tea and get yourself dressed, it'd be a long day. But the problem is with autopilot, it can actually wreck your life, because you just autopilot in everything, and if it's a negative thing, you'll just keep replicating it. Whereas when you actually can recognize, as you said, when you become aware of that, and the need to create a different story, and as you say, a very clear destination. If people have got a strong enough why, they'll find the how.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about in the next few weeks. And I just want to go back to the resilience just to finish this segment. And again, I don't know if you're going to remember exactly what you said before in a prior teaching engagement with my mentorship students, but about what's a powerful question that you can ask to show people their resilience. Can you remember? Sorry.
One of the stories I've got, Dave, is I've not got a good memory.
Yeah.
I think for me, we'll touch in future episodes on the power of questions, because questions direct attention. Very you might correct me, but very simply, at what point in your life have you been most resilient?
That's it. You got it. That was it. So yeah, I've got here. When have you been your most resilient? And just talk about the power of that question just to finish today.
Well, if you think about it, if you ask that question, when in your life have you been most resilient? The first thing that your brain does.
Don't give too much away for the brain boosters. I know what you're going to do.
Your brain will search for an answer to that question.
Yeah.
So it's immediate. It's like punching a question into Google. Away you go. The algorithms kick in and it comes up with an answer. Now, there will be a point in everybody's life when they've been resilient. They may not remember it straight away, but they will do.
Yeah.
And they'll have maybe long forgotten that. But it could be something at junior school, or they broke a leg and got back on the football field, or whatever it is. But by asking the question, you get that search through their personal history, and then they'll go, yeah, I was strong then. I did prove to myself I could do it.
Yeah.
But the environment that they're currently in may have buried that deeply.
Exactly. And what Karl has just said there, he's giving you massive clues into how we can apply all this. Okay, this is very easy to apply, and that's why I like working with Karl. That's why I've got Karl working very, very closely with some close high-level therapists that I work with privately, okay, because Karl gives us an ability to apply this information. This doesn't have to be complicated. We don't have to have sports psychologist degrees, because we're doing stuff anyways and bringing our awareness to how powerful we can be in helping that person get to the ideal outcome. As I said, it's stuff we're doing anyway, but just understanding and tweaking a couple of little things and understanding the thought process of why we're asking these questions, it can be very, very powerful. And I've seen firsthand, and obviously I want to thank you again for the influence you've had on my...
Just on that point, David, these things, they are simple things, and they need to be simple things, because I've seen it over the years. The most effective coaches that I've ever seen are smart enough to keep it simple.
Exactly.
But actually, you need to know a few of the key simple things, and then just do them better and better and better. Concepts like attention and questions, the simple concepts, but you can get better and better at it if you stick with that.
Absolutely, and I said, I can attest to that. And my motto here with the therapist mentorship is do the basics extraordinary. And when I went on to some of these courses, that they were getting a little bit carried away with the claims they were making and going to all these higher levels and all sorts. And I'm just like, it just overwhelms people, and it overwhelms our patients. And once we keep things simple, you don't get overwhelmed, the patient doesn't get overwhelmed, they can understand, and magical things happen. And that's very, very powerful. So as I said, Karl has dropped a lot there today. But that's just literally the tip of the iceberg for what's under the hood there with Karl. And I said, I'm very excited to introduce Karl to you. And as I said, you're going to see a lot more of Karl in the coming months. And I think Karl's going to have a massive influence on helping you start to make sense of some of the trickier cases, but most importantly, how to apply this information in the real world to get real results, but most importantly, to make meaningful impacts on your patients' lives. So Karl, thanks very much.